Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and today I'm doing my wrap-up part 2 for March? Yes. Why do I never remember what month it is? March. But before I do that, I just got back from Canadian Tire because I was picking up some little pots to transplant some other seedlings into. And I don't know how well these will focus, but at the grocery store, they had this rubber tree that was a variety I've never seen before. Is that gonna focus? Ish. So, you know, if you know what variety is, let me know, because those plant identifying apps are terrible at varieties. And then I got, and this is the really exciting bit, the rubber tree will be nice at work too. Is this gonna focus? Come on, there we go. Chocolate mint. 2 of them. So this is one of those plants that, because it's a hybrid, you can't buy it from seed because it would just revert back to one of the parent seeds or parent varieties. But it's chocolate mint and it smells like chocolate mint. Oh, it's so nice. I love it. And I didn't have any left from, well, I didn't have any last year actually. Couldn't find it. And my one the year before had died, so I was very excited to get these at Canadian Tire, and any store with a garden center is dangerous this time of year, even if the garden centers aren't really gardening yet, because it was snowing this morning. So yeah, that's fun. Canadian weather. Anyway, that's my little plant detour intro. Now for the books I've read this month. So the first book I read was called Fighting with, well, I say read. A lot of these were audiobooks, and this was one of them. It's one of those great courses ones, actually. Fighting Misinformation, Digital Media Literacy. It was good. It was basic, but it was a good overview, which apparently a worrying amount of people need, given the amount of misinformation on the internet. So, and people who believe it. And one of the things I've done this month, because I'm a data analyst in my real life job, and I had to go to a data conference for work earlier this month, and one of the speakers was talking about her Medium account and how she writes articles there and things. And I haven't written any articles or anything yet. I've got a couple ideas, but they're brewing still. But what I did do is wrote a few summaries, like key points from some of the data information sort of books I read this month, and this was the first one. So it's just, I'll link it below in case anybody's curious, but it's basically the key points of ways you can tell if something's fake information online or manipulated information. The next book I read, which was absolutely maddening, was Invisible Women. It's also about data. It's about the data gender gap. And I made a Medium article about all these, the first 4 books I want to talk about. So Invisible Women is by, I think she's actually a statistician. Anyway, she works with data all the time. And for women, it's often missing. Like, men are the default, and people in everything from vehicle safety to healthcare to, refugee crises don't consider women. They just consider men the default. And so when you have, a lot of women complaining about harassment, they're not believed, because why would they believe them? Men are the default. That doesn't happen to men. And same with things like vehicle safety. She talks a lot about, well, did she talk about AI? She talked a lot about algorithms, and it's the same for AI. If the information it learns on is biased, the results it produces will be biased. And the information it learns on is mostly written by men, often white men, compounding the problem for women of color. And so there are a lot of gaps in the data and a lot of things that just aren't known. Because even in medical testing, people won't do trials on women because hormones and periods and things complicate things, because of course they do, but then you can't assume that medications work exactly the same way. So yeah, that's the sort of book that makes you want to smack some sense into some people. So it was really frustrating. She talks about a bit about politics too, because of course the experiences of men and women in politics are vastly different, as probably every woman just sort of knows, but men might not. So it was a really interesting book, and I'm glad I read it, even though it's infuriating. The next book was a reread for me called Storytelling with Data, and the fourth book was Decision Quality. And I won't go too much into either of these because they're really data industry specific, but Storytelling with Data is basically exactly what the title says, how to take data and make it into a compelling story for the people that you're trying to communicate with. And Decision Quality was a book that was also recommended by somebody at this conference that was, yeah, okay. It wasn't my favorite. Yeah, I liked the other three books better. It was about a suggested way to go about making decisions, particularly complex ones with really high stakes. And, you know, it was good, but it wasn't earth-shatteringly good. Okay. The next books I read were memoir history type books. And this one is Apollo 13. And I have watched this movie more than I have watched any other movie ever. Like, ever. I've watched it several times in French, and I have no idea how many times in English. It's phenomenal, and I love it. And I have no idea why I haven't read the book earlier, but I finally got to it, and it's also fantastic. It's just so interesting, but I like any sort of NASA stories. Gene Kranz also wrote a book about this called Failure is Not an Option. And so I want to read that one as well, which I will do eventually. I have too many books to read. But that was really good. This book I didn't actually finish, so it's not on my list of books that I read because it just wasn't very good. I started reading it and didn't finish it. I got maybe, yay far into it, something like that. And gave up because the first part of the book is all about, on the one hand, him complaining about the American South and insulting Southerners, and on the other hand, insulting somebody who's allegedly his friend, who he really doesn't treat like a friend. And so I just, no thanks. I'm good. That's gonna go into a free little library. Somebody else can have fun with that one. Then I finally finished, several months after I started it, A Piece to End All Peace by David Fromkin, From the Fall of the Ottoman Empire to the Creation of the Modern Middle East. And it's really good. It's very much, most of it's from a Western perspective, so you don't get a lot of Middle Eastern perspectives, but that's kind of expected in this sort of book. But it's a really good overview of the mess that the West created in the Middle East, because it's a disaster, and it's been a disaster for well over 100 years now. And it's been a disaster in large part because of the decisions of mostly England, but also France and the US. And a few other players, but those are the big ones. And so it's one of those really frustrating books to read where, I know mindsets were different then with Empire and, whatever. It doesn't make it right. And it doesn't make the way they treated people in the Middle East right. And the way they treated people was very condescending and paternalistic. Like, they couldn't possibly run their own lives or make their own choices, that sort of thing. And there was a lot of that. Like which American president was it? Woodrow Wilson, I think, who suggested that they ask people in the Middle East what they thought or what they wanted. The amount of condescension and just dismissal was ridiculous. And it really does pretty clearly lay out how we got to the mess that we've currently got, including with Israel and Palestine. So yeah, it was a good one. It's, as history books go, it was pretty easy to read. Like, I didn't find it at all dry or anything. But I also like reading history books because they're interesting. So yeah, that was that one. And then I read Twilight of Democracy by Anne Applebaum. And I kind of expected more from that, to be honest, because I'd read her book Iron Curtain before, which was fantastic. And this one was just okay. Like, some of the points she made were interesting, but she didn't really go deep on much of anything. And yeah, I don't know. Some points of view she didn't seem to care to understand. Like, she cared to understand how alt-right people came to be alt-right. So that was interesting. Like, I'm never going to agree with the alt-right people, but I am curious how they came to think the way they do. And so that's partly what she or in large part what she talks about. She did sort of dismiss out of hand as identity politics the points of view of anybody else, like any people of color, anybody else who fit into sort of a minority or oppressed category. So that was a bit annoying. Like, she didn't really seem to care about other people's perspectives on things, except for her perspectives, which are sort of center right, and then the absolutely off the edge of reason, alt-right. So, on the one hand, it was kind of interesting. On the other hand, it was a little disappointing because I just expected more. Like, it could have been twice as long and she could have gone into more depth, and I would have appreciated that. This was just okay. And then I read When Religion Hurts You by Laura E. Anderson, who I think is a psychologist or something. Yeah, psychotherapist. And this one was really good, because I think she's been through some of this stuff. So she talked about a bit about her experiences, and then a bit about, like, more sort of clinical point of view experiences of religious trauma, basically, and high control religion, and leaving high control religion, and the recovery process after that, which is a heck of an interesting road, I can tell you. Yeah, it was really good. I follow her on Instagram, and she's always got something interesting to say, and I appreciate her point of view a lot. And yeah, I'm grateful that this sort of book exists now. Okay, now my little plants are getting in the way. Oh well. Next, I read Death Nesting. The Heart-Centered Practices of a Death Doula. It's the first book by a death doula I've ever read. I can't enunciate today, sorry. And it was also really interesting. She talks about taking care of somebody when you're dying in the same way that you take care of somebody when they're giving birth, which, is to say, in a not overly medicalized context would be ideal, unless it's needed. And she talks about a lot of the things that death doulas can do, like to help with, in terms of making the experience something that the dying person wants, respecting their preferences and giving them sort of options to make them feel as relaxed and at peace as possible. And then some of the, like, mundane, really just practical. Ooh, I've got potting soil bits also under my fingernails. Ignore that. Potting soil bits everywhere. Because I've been transplanting some seedlings today, and I will go back to doing that after this. But yeah, a lot of her advice was just really practical odds and ends of things that you might not think of until you're in that situation or a loved one is in that situation. And it was really interesting, and very helpful, and I really need to, make a will one of these days. Should get that done. Then I read The Bones Fall in a Spiral, a Necromantic Primer by Martellus. I'd watched an interview with her and is it Ivy the Occultist? It might have been the Norse Witch, but I think it was Ivy the Occultist. Anyway, it was a really good interview, and it got me interested in this book. And this book was also really good. It's just, I don't know if it's an area that I'm gonna explore any further, but it was really interesting. And one of the things I think that gardening teaches you is how close death is to life. You can try and push it away, but it's still everywhere. And even as I've been planting my seedlings, I've been taking out ones that, if 3 seeds sprout in one little pot, I'm not going to keep 3 tomato plants in that little pot. I'm going to pull at least one of them out. And so things die, and the process of watching things compost is actually fascinating. You can know about it intellectually, but then when you actually watch the process happen, it's a totally different experience. And so this book was really interesting. It had some cool ideas and things. I think I'll probably read it again sometime, because I feel like the first time through was just me getting an idea of what she's even talking about when it comes to necromancy. And the second time through will be more about, okay, I want to try this, or I want to look more into that sort of thing, I think. So yeah, I enjoyed that one. It was really good. And then I read Read Like the Devil, and I'd started this, I think back in October, and just got really sidetracked by so many other books. But I finally finished it this month, and it's so good. I love it. I don't always agree with her point of view. She's really, I don't know if we'd like get along in person, because she's got a really forceful personality, and she knows what she thinks, and she's not shy about it, and she will be very blunt about it. And it's very entertaining to read about. She's like a character in a novel or something. Like, she's, yeah, lots of personality and very opinionated, which is cool. Like, you know, that's not in any way a criticism. It's just, I'm not sure I'd actually like her in person, but I like her book. And I will read her other, at least the card playing book I've got. I might read the Lenormand one someday, but I'm not really interested in Lenormand at the moment. But the playing cards one, I will definitely read, because I love her style of writing, and just the way she thinks. Like, the way she views the cards is very different from what you usually see. Her view of the world is a bit different, and so it's so cool to get different people's points of view. And it's very different from every other tarot book I've ever read. Like, it's not a rinse and repeat introduction to tarot book. Very much not that. But this is the kind of book I'm sort of more interested in now. Sorry if I have to keep pausing to cough, because I'm allergic to the air in Alberta. It's exciting. Anyway, yeah, this is very much the sort of tarot book that I'm interested in these days. Just this, and, well, I'll talk about one of the next ones I read, which is A Walk Through the Forest of Souls by Rachel Pollack, which is also fantastic. And those are the sorts of books that I'm interested in now, where you're not getting, you know, a summary of this card means this and that card means, you know, fine, whatever. And you're not getting a history of tarot or anything like that, because there are like 1,000,001 books that do that. That being said, I still will probably read Lisa Pepez's book when it comes out later this year, but just out of curiosity, because she also just has a different point of view than like mine. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, these sorts of more, I don't know, philosophical ways to view the cards, work with cards, that's kind of what I'm interested in at this point. So those are fun. And then I did read Cartomancy and Folk Witchcraft, Playing Cards, and Marseille Tarot in Divination, Magic, and Lore by Roger J. Horn. And, you know, it was good. It's sort of in between an introduction, like, it's got, you know, what all the cards mean. Which on the one hand is handy. I mean, I have the Untold Tarot for that too, because the Marseille is a bit different than others. And with playing cards, I mean, it sort of depends where you ask and which country you're from, or which region of the country you're from, and you'll get different answers on meanings. It's not so nailed down as the Rider-Waite-Smith might be. But, so yeah, this book sort of splits the difference between that and a little bit of history and a little more how you can do things. Sympathy, contagion, and ecstasis. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. It was interesting. It was fun. I'm glad I read it. I didn't find it groundbreaking or anything, but it was good. Okay, next up. So I went to a really geeky gardening book launch. Just put those books down out of the way. And got a couple new books. So I got Grasses and Pests and Diseases. This series is the Prairie Gardener's go-to for X, Y, and Z. Actually, let me see if they've got a list in the back. Yeah, they do. Vegetables, seeds, small spaces, soil, all sorts of things. I think they've got 11 now. No, 10. They've got 10 now. They talked about the 11th one that they're coming out with next year. And then I read them already because they're really easy to read. And I went because of the grasses one, because I wanted to learn more about local grasses, because I do live on the prairies. And most of the prairie grass, like when new areas of town are developed, the last, sort of vestiges of actual prairie are ripped up and replaced with sod of Kentucky bluegrass, which seems kind of a travesty to me. I don't like it. There's really very little natural prairie left on the prairie. It's dwindling really quickly. And so I wanted to know more about different grasses. They do talk about native grasses here that you can grow like in gardens and things. And it's actually kind of a really interesting format for a gardening book. It's handy because it's a Q&A format. So they'll have what edible grasses can we grow on the prairies, a 1 or 2 page answer to that with some suggestions that I will look into for sure. And then a bunch of pictures of different things. The pictures are especially helpful in the pests and diseases. I still can't enunciate. What's up with that today? Not that I'm ever really good at that, but anyway. Okay. What grasses or weeds? Are there any turf grass alternatives that are drought tolerant? What are some beautiful grasses to put in my pond? How are grasses used in naturalistic garden design? The grass will not grow where I want it to. Under my conifers, why not? So it's just, yeah, chock full of really helpful, practical information about gardening on the prairies. And same with the pests and diseases book. So I may actually try a couple more of these at some point. But yeah, I enjoyed them a lot. Then I read Plants of the Devil, which I'd also started earlier this winter. And then sidetracked again. Well, what can you do when you have so many books to read? That's bound to happen sometimes. Anyway, it's fantastic. I love Corinne Boyer's books. I've read, I think, 3 of them now. I've got one more here, and then another allegedly on the way. So yeah, looking forward to that. It's just so interesting. I love plants and folklore, and so when you have a book of just plant folklore, I'm all over that. Then I read Entering Hecate's Garden, which was okay. It was a little bit about plant spirit witchcraft. I liked that part. The Hecate specific stuff, I realized I'm not really so into. I mean, I'm just not into Greek mythology beyond sort of wanting to know the basics. Like, and the only reason I want to know the basics is because it pops up in Western literature so much for hundreds of years. And so yeah, the basics, great. Anything else, not really my cup of tea. So that being said, I did get the Mythos deck, or pre-ordered the Mythos deck, which should be arriving next week, maybe. So, oh well. So yeah, it was good. I wouldn't read it again, but maybe if you're really into Hecate and that sort of area, you would. I don't know. Some of it's a bit made up. I'm not really sure how firm a grasp she has on Greek mythology, and how clearly she separates her own beliefs and actual historical records of myths. So there's that to consider, but oh well. And then I read The Witch's Ointment, which is really interesting and not at all what I expected. Well, kind of what I expected. It really is a history book, like any other history book. It's not like a popular witchcraft sort of book. It's very much not that. But he goes through the history of how the witch's ointment came to be, at least in Europe, Western Europe specifically, and different records that have been found, usually involving witch trials, but sometimes other documentation of what these ointments were that could do this, that, and the other. He starts actually with the Greeks and then the Romans, and then veers into Christianity, witch trials, that sort of thing, until we get to the present day. And it's interesting. Yeah, I didn't expect quite like a proper history book, but that's what it is. And it was good. It wasn't the most thrilling history book I've ever read in my life, which is weird because I have made a witch's ointment. But yeah, it was pretty interesting to read, and I'm glad I did. How many times can I say interesting about one book? Anyway, then I read The Crooked Path, An Introduction to Traditional Witchcraft. Yeah, I'm not sure it's for me. Like, I'm not saying it's not a good book if that's your thing, but I'm very much more folk everything. Just folk everything. And very much not ritual, ceremonial, any of that at all. No, like less than no interest in that. And traditional witchcraft is much more that way inclined. So yeah, I'm not sure that was for me. Bism, Sting, and Sword was a bit more folk, but is still a little bit too much ritual for me. But much more folk. And so that was more interesting. I enjoyed that. I listened to that during a nice long outdoor walk in some of our last Romanian prairie. So that was fun. And then I listened to Water Witchcraft, which was okay. It's very much what I expected it to be in this case. Just sort of a book of different types of water witchcraft, different types of things you can do, like there's a section on ice, there's a section I think on storms, a section on the ocean or the beach or things like that. So, it was interesting. Maybe some fun ideas, but that's about as far as that goes for me. Then I read Dreams of Being Eaten Alive, The Literary Core of the Kabbalah. I'd been curious about the Kabbalah ever since I listened to the podcast. What's it called? T. Susan Chang and M.M. Lane's podcast. The Fortune's Wheelhouse. That's what it's called. And then I read Tarot Deciphered by them as well. And both are phenomenal. So I'd been sort of interested in what Kabbalah even was, because those are the parts of the podcast that I really didn't follow, like at all. But it was also really important to me to read a book about Kabbalah by a Jewish author. Because Hermetic Kabbalah that just sort of ignores or passes by the Jewish roots really feels appropriative to me, and I'm not comfortable with that. So this is a Jewish poet who also translates biblical texts. That's a strange word to try and say. Anyway, it's so bizarre. It's so not what I expected it to be. It's wild. This book is a roller coaster. It's like, if all you know about the Kabbalah is the Tree of Life associations with the tarot, that is like this teeny bit amount of what Kabbalah is. It's fascinating, and I'm not sure it's for me. I may never read anything else about Kabbalah. This book I don't know. It's got the best title I've ever read in my life. Used to be in a library in California. And so what he's got is a section on how to read the Kabbalah, some translations from the Zohar, so you can actually read some of the Zohar. That's wild. That is, having read the Bible several times, this is a journey. It's a journey. And then how to receive the Kabbalah and notes and commentary. And wow, is this ever not what I expected it would be? There's so much sex and so much violence. It's wild. And like gory violence too. Roller coaster. So if you're curious about Kabbalah, I do recommend this book. I heard about this book in A Walk Through the Forest of Souls by Rachel. Why am I blanking on Pollock? I don't know why. I've blanked on her name in a couple of videos now, and who knows why. Seriously, because I've read a couple of her books now, one of them twice. So you'd think I'd know it. And, you hear about her everywhere, so I don't know why I keep blanking on her name, but oh well. Anyway, because she was a Jewish woman, I thought, okay, if she recommends this book, then maybe this will be the first one you know, and as it turns out, it might be the only one, because I'm not sure Kabbalah is really a thing for me, but it was super interesting to read about. And I thought if she talked about it a couple of times in that book, actually. So yeah, I thought, okay, that'll be the one I try then. And I'm glad I did, but yeah, wow, is it a ride. And then I read, oh, did I miss a book? Oh yeah, I did. Whoops. I missed a book in the gardening section, well, the plant section. So I read Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's the same author who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Also, just look at how beautiful that is. I want to be wherever this is. Just forever. Like, just lie down in the moss and never leave. Anyway, she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, which I also love. And this is my second time reading this book, and I'm not sorry I did. It's beautiful, and I love it. It's not maybe quite the masterpiece that Braiding Sweetgrass is, in my opinion, but it's so good. And she's got such a beautiful way of describing things. And actually, I listened to the audiobook because her voice is like, not ASMR exactly, but really soft and gentle. So it's really relaxing. Yeah, it's cool. Plus, Bailey from the Bailey Grind was doing a book club for February and March I think the app is called Fable, and other people need to comment about it so we can talk about it. Come on, guys. But yeah, really love this book. It's been fun to reread. And then I read, well, okay, so the next ones are all audiobooks of novels. So I was watching, I think her name is Rachel, forgive me if I'm wrong, from Second Thoughts About the Mission. And she was talking about a book that she'd read by Edna O'Brien. And the way she talked about it was so intriguing. So I went to my library app and checked to see if they had any audiobooks, and they had a couple. And so I read The Little Red Chairs. And oh my God, was it good. I have no idea how to describe it because it's so many different things at once. But also it's really simple. Like it's complicated, but at the same time, it's just a story about one Irish woman who had the misfortune to have a relationship with a very wrong man. And the fallout from that, which is considerable. But on the other hand, the relationships, the different strands of the story, the story feels different at different points depending on, you know, which sort of segment of the story you're in. It's so good. And so I will definitely be reading more of her. Apparently she's been banned in some places in Ireland, which, you know, if the Irish Catholic Church doesn't like something, sign me right up, basically. So I want to read Wild Decembers, because I think my library, that's another audiobook that I think my library has. And then I want to read Country Girls, which I think was her first one that got originally the backlash by the more conservative Catholic sort of situation in Ireland. So that was really cool. And then I listened to Cantoros by Caroline de Robertis. I can't pronounce Spanish names, apologies. It was good. It's one of those books that I'm glad I read, but I know I'm never going to read again. It was a story about 5 women who were all gay, sometimes had relationships with each other, some of them, not all of them, and bought this little house, sort of out of the big city, at the edge of the ocean. And house might be a bit generous, like a shack is what they bought. And there was a dictatorship apparently in Uruguay, which I had no idea about. And but now, so it went up to, I think, 2013 when gay marriage was legalized there, post dictatorship, and it started during the dictatorship. So it was a really nice story. It wasn't I don't know. It wasn't my favorite thing I've ever read in my life, but it was good. I liked it. Might I read other books by that author? Possibly. We'll see. You know, I do appreciate some LGBTQ plus representation. That's always nice. And it was a well-told story. It was a bit... Some of the characters were more well-developed, I guess, than others. But, yeah, it was good. The next book was one of my favorites of the month, which was Confessions of the Lioness by Mia Couto. And he's a Mozambican, is that how you say that, author? I don't know. Some of those, there's a word for that when you call somebody from Canada Canadian, but I can't remember what that word is. Anyway, I don't know what you call people from Mozambique. But this book was stunning. Confession of the Lioness is so good that I will also definitely be reading more by Mia Couto. It's a book that explores the lives of women in this rural area in Mozambique and the way that both colonialism and patriarchy have just made their lives hell, basically, and what they have to do to try and survive that, and how they sometimes very much don't survive that. And it's beautiful. It's got a little bit of, I mean, I guess you could say magical realism going on, because I'm not really sure what else to call it, because it's not realism. It's something other than that, but I'm not quite sure if magical realism is the right thing. Maybe it is. It's a bit like that. And I do like magical realism, so, you know, it works for me. I'm a fan of this Mozambican author who I had never heard of before, so that's cool. And then I listened to Beyond the Rice Fields by Nevo, who is the first, now this I do know, somebody from Madagascar is apparently called Malagasy, which I found out when I looked up this author to find out who he was, and apparently he's now living in Canada. But he's the first Malagasy author to be translated into English, and this was like sometime within the last 10 years, which is kind of ridiculous. But also, I mean, good for him. And it was interesting. It was like, I'm glad I read it. It's another one of those. I'm glad I read it. It certainly expanded my view of the world, because I knew nothing about Madagascar. But there was a lot of like Madagascar politics and history involved in this book, and there were sometimes I was just lost. And couldn't figure out what was happening and why things were happening, because I just didn't know, you know. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, that's partly why I read books from around the world, is to sort of expand my view of the world. So it was interesting to learn about, but at the same time, it was more work than other books where I sort of already know about the political situation, or it doesn't have so much of that as sort of woven into the story. But yeah, I mean, it was good. It was a good book. I liked it. Then I'm currently reading, and will probably finish tomorrow, which will be March 31st, The Old Drift. So I'm including that for this month, which is a book by a Zambian author. It's also a new to me country in my Read Around the World challenge. I mean, it's not my challenge, it's a challenge I'm doing, but what was I gonna say? I don't know about this one. I don't know. Allegedly, it's a bit sci-fi, but I think maybe I haven't gotten to that part yet, except I'm more than 2/3 of the way through. So the first half, at least, is historical fiction. Probably 2/3, I would say, is historical fiction, and then we sort of get up to the present day, and then maybe beyond the present day. I'm not really clear on that yet, because I'm not quite finished. The thing about it that I don't like, I'm always a bit conflicted about books with a lot of different characters whose lives weave in and out of each other's, because on the one hand, yes, I mean, that happens. On the other hand, it's sometimes really hard to keep track of who's who and why they matter to other characters and what's happening. And I'm finding that a little bit with this one, because there are basically 9 characters. So there are 3 grandmothers, 3 mothers, and 3 children. And so each chapter, the first third of the book is section 1, and with 3 parts, 1 for each of the grandmothers. And then same for the second part with the 3 mothers, and then the final part with the 3 children, and that's the part I'm on right now. But it's a bit like reading 9 different novellas that are sort of connected to each other somehow. So just when you get invested in a character, you switch to another character. And then, but each section is like 2 hours long, so it's like a small book by itself, like a novella by itself. So I'm having a hard time holding on to all the different, at this point, who's who and what they mean to each other. Because clearly some of these families know each other. So one's Italian, one's English, and one's, well, I say one's English. The English family is mixed, so one of the grandmothers was English, but she married a Zambian man. And then the third family is Zambian. But I think there's a white man involved in that family tree somewhere. But then some of the descendants get, like, meet each other in other people's chapters. But by then I've sort of not forgotten who's who, because you do spend a good chunk of time with each of the grandmothers and then each of the mothers. But they all have so many kids and other characters in each of these mini novellas that trying to keep track of who's somebody's other child who's connected now to this child is, yeah, I'm having a bit of difficulty with that. Which I do just have sort of trouble with in any sort of book that bounces back and forth between perspectives. So, I don't know. I'm not convinced by this one yet. It does bring up, if you have ever heard of the Zambian space program, which was sort of considered a joke by the Western media, and maybe it was. Some people have said it was, like some Zambian people who were a part of it have said it was a joke. Some people insist that it was a serious endeavor. But other people consider the guy who ran it to be sort of a madman who would train 17-year-old astronauts by putting them in a water barrel and rolling them down a hill to get them used to weightlessness, like that sort of thing. So that came up in there, which was interesting, because I think I've read about that in another book. I've definitely heard about it before. And the experiences of people, both white and black, in Zambia, like colonial Zambia and then free Zambia, like Zambia when it was one of the Rhodesias. I want to say Northern Rhodesia, but I could be wrong. It could have been Southern or some other Rhodesia. There were like 3 Rhodesias. And then it was called Zambia when they were their own independent country. And so that sort of, there's a bit of history in there and a bit of sort of interpersonal I don't know, intrigue, I guess, between characters that's kind of interesting. So I enjoyed that. And I enjoy, like, taken individually, each of the novellas are kind of interesting. It's the keeping the connections all clear that I'm not convinced by yet. So anyway, I'll stop rambling about that and go finish it and do some more transplanting. So if you've made it to the end, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.